So there was this rather simple, not very bright, but very pious guy once who wanted to go ice fishing. He decided to go ice fishing. And you know what that is here. You've seen it on the lake, right? You go pitch up a little tent and chip in the ice and off you go. So he got his equipment, he went to the ice and set up his little tent and started chipping away at the ice. And he hears this voice from above saying, "There are no fish in the ice there." So he thought, oh my gosh, the Lord himself is telling me where I'm going to find the fish. This is going to be a good fishing day. So he picks up his gear and he goes to another place on the ice, sets up his little tent, starts chipping away, and again he hears this voice. "There are no fish in the ice there." Oh, he was so happy. God is going to lead him to the best spot to catch fish. So he moves his stuff, sets up the tent, starts chipping at the ice, and again the voice, "This is the manager of the hockey rink. There are no fish in the ice there." All right, a couple of you laughed just to be nice. Those of you at home, I hope you got a giggle out of it. In other words, he thought he was doing the right thing. He thought God himself was telling him what to do, but he was pretty wrong. The voices that we hear, whether they are actual human voices of us talking to each other, voices that we remember in our memory, voices of people that maybe we don't see anymore or have passed away, or voices, our own voices inside our hearts and our minds that tell us things about ourselves. Somehow in the midst of all of these voices, we need to figure out which is the voice of God. And we have scripture readings that give us a sense that we can't always be precise. You know, we might get it wrong. You know, a couple of months ago, my father passed away, and recently, it was his birthday, would have been his birthday this week. So my two sisters and I got together and had supper on his birthday at the old house. We still have the house, and so we got together. And we were telling stories and memories, and every now and then one of us would say something that would be like, "That's what Dad would have said." We hear my dad's voice in my head saying his little things, and now we're doing it, and we can hear his voice in us saying these things. And so we were well trained, you know, by listening to that voice, a voice that we loved and that we miss very much now. But what was happening in the scriptures today, the first reading and the gospel, both stories that we're very familiar with, God was present to Elijah the prophet and then to the apostles in the gospel story in a way that they weren't expecting. And one made an error of overconfidence, or maybe even arrogance, but let's just stick with overconfidence. And the other one, underconfidence. Elijah was overly confident that he knew exactly how God was going to speak with him. And so he was expecting God to speak with him through the mighty winds and the fire and the earthquake, these big, mighty signs. He was confident that that's how God was going to speak with him. But that's not how God was speaking with him. Only after Elijah was able to sort of quiet down and let God come to him on God's terms was Elijah able to recognize that God was speaking to him in the quietest whisper. Not in the dramatic phenomenon, but in the quiet. There was God. The apostles, on the other hand, were underconfident. Jesus himself was there, and they didn't trust that it was really him. Jesus called out to them, and invited even Peter to come. Remember, Peter said, if this is you, tell me to come on out. If this is you, he says. They were underconfident. Jesus was obviously there to them, and they didn't trust themselves that this was really him. So Peter says, if it's you, tell me to come. So Jesus says, okay, come. And as he comes out, he freaks out, Peter does. And then in his fear, he begins to fall into the water because he's not confident in Jesus, whom clearly he knows it's him now. And so Peter and the other apostles are underconfident. Elijah is overconfident. Neither one of them was able to recognize the sign of God at work right in front of them. What about us? How do we know? How do we know of the many voices that are coming at us? Which one is the voice of God? We can easily be mistaken, like our simple guy on the hockey rink, and think that what we're hearing is God when it's not God at all. That's the overconfident of Elijah. And I've come across people who say, they're absolutely convinced God himself said you need to do X, or God himself is saying this very clear, specific thing. And I'm usually not so confident. I tend toward the sin of underconfidence. I'm more like Peter than Elijah. But what we need to do to make sure we're neither overconfident nor underconfident, neither making the mistake of Elijah nor of Peter, is to continually tune our hearts to the Lord in prayer, in our prayer. How can we think we can discern the sense of God speaking to us if we don't exercise that kind of discipline in our lives? It's amazing, during the COVID shutdown times, things are slowed down. Remember in March, everybody's sort of hunkering in their houses, and it was winter, so there wasn't really that much to do anyway. And people had plenty of time to do things like reflect, pray, read, call each other and just listen to each other talk. And it's amazing how few people actually did that. But how many people filled up that empty space with all kinds of additional empty other things. Well, we don't need a pandemic to slow us down and to help us tune in, because God is continually speaking to us. God is continually present to us, every moment, every second, every day, all places, always. There's no place where God isn't. It's a question of how God is ready to speak to you at this time. It's sort of like a radio. You know, we're surrounded right now by radio signals, aren't we? All kinds of radio signals. There's the radio, like you tune on your car radio, with signals all around us. Television is also a form of radio signal. Our cell phones are all radio signals. Even the sound equipment in this church is connected via a form of radio signals. The stars are sending us radio signals. So we're surrounded by radio signals. Can any of you hear them right now? I hope not. If you put your hand up, I'd be really worried, wouldn't I? We can't hear them. But that doesn't mean they're not there. But we need a radio or a cell phone or a TV or something to tune in to the frequency and hear what's there. In a similar way, our relationship with God calls for us to tune our frequency to that channel, so to speak. To find, of all of the noise that's out there, where's the voice of God speaking to me now? Tune it in. Find it. And once you find it, sit there for a while and wait to see what God has to say to you. Now, it sounds easy enough to say, well, you just turn on your radio, tune to WGOD, and see what God has to say. The life of prayer is not that simple. It requires practice, much like an athlete requires practice. It requires time, much like cooking a good meal requires time. In fact, anything worth doing requires discipline, time, and effort, and patience. But our personal life of prayer is so crucial because that allows us to go through the stormy noise that Elijah had, or the fear and tumult that the apostles had, and still be able to beam in on how God is present to us in the midst of that. There is never any time when God abandons us. It's just that we are the ones that tune him out. Years ago, there was a poster on our grade school bulletin board in Catholic school, and it said, "If God seems far away, who moved?" In a similar way, if you can't hear God speaking to you, who's not listening? So I say the scriptures today are calling us to that deeper, quieter sense of prayer that can sustain us whether we're in the storm in the boat or in the quiet of the mountain. God, who wants to speak to us always, is ready for us to be ready to hear him, so that when he has something to say to you particularly, you'll be ready to hear it. And if in the meantime all you get is just quiet from the Lord, that's him speaking to you too, giving you the gift of peace in your heart, calming you down and centering you and creating space in your heart, so that when he is ready to give you a word, you'll know it's him and you'll be ready to hear it. So take comfort in our God who speaks to us in scriptures, God who speaks to us in his presence at the Eucharist, God who speaks to us in our conversations with one another, and God who speaks to us in the privacy of our own hearts. Attune ourselves to that voice of God, and we will be able to then know what out there is truly of God and what is not. Only then, with that discipline of heart, can we be peaceful, tranquil, and confident in the storms that rage around us.